here we are with Kevin Noon, the publisher and managing editor of BuckeyeGrove.com, part of the Rivals Network. Kevin, thank you so much for joining CFB Unfiltered.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to talking a little bit about the Buckeyes with you here. Ohio State, year in and year out, a perennial playoff contender. But before we get to that, I'm sure you've been asked about it many times by many people, the Alliance. Give me your thoughts here, Kevin, on the Alliance. What does it mean, and how's it going to impact things going forward?
Well, what does it mean? I'm not really quite sure. A whole lot of nothing to me at this point. They came out with just about as little information as I expected. Oh, we're going to schedule against each other, but we're going to honor our contracts, and we'll get around to it eventually, and so on and so forth. And you already have the Alston, from that lawsuit coming out and saying, if you use this as any sort of collusion to try and set player potential earnings, we're going to come after you. So it all sounds well and good in theory in terms of trying to stay up maybe with the SEC, certainly try and wrestle some power away from ESPN in terms of owning the postseason. But, color me a little skeptical at this point that it really amounts to anything, because it just sounds like a lot of nice platitudes and not a lot of substance.
It's almost unbelievable to me that three powerful men, commissioners of major conferences would come out, make a big deal about this press conference, and then in the midst of it say, oh, no, nothing's been signed. There's no signed agreement here. So like you said, it seems to be a little bit of a nothing burger in terms of that. But just thinking a little bit deeper into it, Ohio State specifically, what would they gain out of the scheduling other than maybe an Oregon, which they've already had non-conference games, scheduled with Oregon in the past and maybe in the future as well. So Oregon, USC, Clemson, and maybe an emerging North Carolina or maybe a Miami if Miami gets back to relevance. What are there any teams that would move the needle for some of these top tier Big Ten teams?
Well, the question really is, Ohio State can go out and schedule what it is that, whoever they want. They play Oregon week 2 of this season. They have series with Texas and Notre Dame. And they just signed an Alabama series in the mid-2030s. Ohio State has never ducked away from playing major non-conference opponents. In the 15 years that I've been with the site, I've seen them play Cal and Washington and Texas, and the list goes on and on and on. So I don't really think that they gain that much. I think the biggest thing is that Ohio State doesn't want to see a college football playoff landscape, be it moving to 12 teams or whatever, where, I'm sorry, not sorry, where there's 5 or 6 SEC teams in it. Ohio State certainly is one of the big dogs outside of the SEC, and Ohio State needs to protect its interests. I think that with this alliance, if the Big Ten falls back in line to playing 8 conference games instead of 9, has 4 non-conference slots, is able to maintain some of the things it has, and it's able to keep its schedule up there, I think that that's what's important to them. I think really being able to feel like it has a little bit more of a seat at the table in terms of the large decisions, because I'm going to be completely honest, I don't think a lot of people in Big Ten country are huge fans of Kevin Warren, Big Ten commissioner at this point. So Ohio State certainly would like to see as many safeguards as it can in terms of protecting its own self-interests.
To that extent, do you think because Ohio State's been so dominant in the Big Ten over the last couple of years, do you think if, let's say, Greg Sankey and the SEC wanted to get even more ambitious and they approached Ohio State and said, Ohio State, do you want to become part of the SEC? Do you think that's even something Ohio State would entertain at a certain juncture?
I think you have to look at it, but we look at conference affiliation at such a small scale. We look at conference affiliation at football, and that's it. That is millions with an M. Conference affiliation on the grand scheme of things is billions with a B. You have the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the BTAA, which used to be the CIC, which was the Council or Consortium on Institutional Cooperation. And that's the research and grants arm of where all of these research universities that are part of the AAU get federal dollars and whatnot in terms of conducting university business and research, and that's billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. So I think that the better chance of seeing major movement is if we just see a split off of football and that we create super conferences in football, and whether or not it's the SEC plus a couple of other teams creates this super conference, or we see a couple of other super conferences. I don't know if you're going to see Ohio State really apt to move in a situation of where it loses the BTAA, where it loses that access to a lot of money in order to make another $20-25 million in terms of football. That certainly becomes penny wise and dollar foolish. As somebody who covers sports for a living, I'd love to see something like that. My wife went to Ole Miss. I've never seen a game in Oxford. I'd love to do all of that. I'm looking forward to some of these SEC series on Ohio State's schedule coming up around 2030 or whenever that is. We'll see if those stick. I mean, people don't forget Ohio State had home and homes with UGA and with Tennessee that were supposed to be happening around this time, and those series got dropped around 2012. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I see a situation of where Ohio State moves away from the Big Ten just because it doesn't make sense in terms of the cost of doing business.
You're absolutely right. And then, you have Kirk Herbstreit, a Ohio State alumni out here calling for, there to be one single commissioner that has power over all the Power 5 conferences. He was making kind of a media loop yesterday. So definitely there's a lot going on, and there could be a lot to look at in the future. Kevin, in terms of this year and this team with Ohio State, obviously they lost just as much as Alabama did, putting 10 draft picks in the league, a quarterback in Justin Fields that was phenomenal last year, and have CJ Stroud coming on board this year. What is it going to take for Ohio State to not, miss a beat? It seems like Nick Saban and Ryan Day are able to just reload and keep things moving on. Is that going to be your take on things with Ohio State this season?
Ohio State certainly needs to fix its defense. Its defense was pedestrian last year, and Ohio State does not generally have pedestrian defenses. There are 90 programs out there nationally that would love to have that pedestrian Ohio State defense, but that's not what Ohio State fans are used to. Ohio State loses its top 4 linebackers, its starting 3, and its number 1 sub of Justin Hilliard. It loses some stuff in the back end as well of the defense in the secondary. So essentially the whole back 7 of the defense is going to be highlighted. And I think that's where the questions are going to be as Ohio State week 1 opens at Minnesota, a conference game, and then week 2 is home against Oregon, and then really can kind of decelerate for the next 4 games. What Ohio State's going to be able to do there with CJ Stroud at quarterback, they're not going to ask him to be Justin Fields. It's sort of like the loss of Trey Sermon. You don't ask one running back to account for all of those yards, to do all of that by himself. It's going to be a situation of, okay, you're going to do this and you're going to do this, and we're going to hopefully account for all of that. So Ohio State's going to have some growing pains for what Ohio State is, maybe here week 1, week 2. I would not be surprised to see Ohio State with a young quarterback and going against a Minnesota team that was giving up about 207 yards a game on the ground last year to come out and ground and pound and run that boring style of 3 yards and a cloud of dust offense that people outside of the Big Ten love to rail on, and go in there and win a game 42-17 by just, ground and pound or whatnot. But, I think Ohio State certainly has the bodies to be able to do it. In a lot of positions, they're long on talent and maybe a little short on experience, but Ohio State probably has a top 3 national offensive line, probably has the best wide receiver room in the nation, and certainly has a great coaching staff. I think that, you put all of that together, there's a lot of pieces in there that are going to work to where Ohio State still trying to figure out its way for the first couple of weeks is still going to look better than 85% of the teams out there nationally that may already know what their path is.
Covering the team as you do, who's maybe a player early that you see Ohio State leaning on the most to help some of those inexperienced guys? I mean, are they just going to be feeding the ball to Chris Olave, trying to, get him as many touches as possible? Or is there somebody else that comes to mind? And then the backup to that would be, are there any surprise players that you think emerge quickly here for Ohio State as well?
I think they're going to be I think there are a lot of names I could list on offense, but the 1-2 punch of Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson at wide receiver are certainly very comforting. You're going to see Jackson Smith-Njigba coming out of the slot. Marvin Harrison Jr., the son of Marvin Harrison Sr., I think is a true freshman that's going to really come out there and just take over the scene the way that Jackson Smith-Njigba did last year. I think running back is going to be an interesting situation. Master Teague last year was coming off of an Achilles injury. Looked a couple steps slow, just did not have it. He's had a tremendous offseason from everything I've been told. Pictures of him from camp, just chiseled. Just really looks the part. Will he be able to play like that? Keep an eye on true freshman running back Trevion Henderson, member of the Rivals 100. I think that he's going to be somebody who's going to come in and wrestle away some carries along with Mayan Williams, who was somebody who had about a dozen carries, but we know how fans can sometimes be. They fixate and focus on the guy that might be the next guy up, and I think Mayan Williams is somebody there. Defensively, I think that Zach Harrison, so much of the defense is going to be predicated on him being able to take that next step. Everybody was hoping he was going to be the next Bosa brother or Chase Young. He's a captain now. The light bulb has gone off. And then a pair of true freshman 5-star defensive ends that have come into the system with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. I think both of them are going to be poised for big years, especially with an injury to Tyler Friday that might cost them the entire season.
Now, in terms of, as you mentioned, you mentioned some freshman names and things like that. Ohio State they're always recruiting at an extremely high level. They're always perennially in the top 5. I know they won a national championship in 2002 and 2014, but as most fanatic, that's what fan is short for, fanatic, fan bases, things like that are highly invested in a program. It's kind of a what have you done for me lately? Even though they made it to a national championship game, I cover Georgia football on the Rivals Network, UGAsports.com. Kevin, just want to know how much of a parallel does there seem to be with the Georgia program, the Ohio State program? It seems like Alabama is that nemesis that you have to get over. They're both recruiting a high level. They both have young head coaches that are seen as doing a very good job. But it seems like Nick Saban is just the thorn in everyone's side. And then, of course, the Justin Fields connection between Georgia and Ohio State. Is there just a lot of similarities between these two programs, even down to the colors?
Yeah, throw some gray in the Georgia uniform. Ohio State certainly loves to wear a black alternate uniform here and there. But, there are some similarities. I would sit there and say when we're talking about Ohio State's nemesis, it's been Clemson as of late. Yeah. And Ohio State finally was able to slay that dragon after going whatever it was, 0-3 against the Tigers, and they were able to beat them pretty well in the Sugar Bowl in the college football playoff semifinals. But, both teams recruit very well. Both teams seem to maximize a lot of the times, and then Alabama certainly is an issue, but let's not forget Ohio State en route to its 2014 championship did beat Alabama in the college football playoff semifinals before beating Oregon in the championship game. I think Ohio State fans would be quick to remind UGA fans that 2014 is a lot more recent than 1980.
Oh yeah, that's why I prefaced it to start off with that they won in 2002 and 2014, but in terms of here lately, it just seems like that Alabama and Clemson have just been trading off, like you said, and it's been that nemesis for both programs.
Well, really. And a benefit that Ohio State has is UGA has Alabama in its conference. Ohio State really doesn't have that, that dominant 900-pound gorilla in the room that it has to deal with. Ohio State certainly has won 4 straight Big Ten outright championships, has been the class of the league, but it seems to rotate who the team is that might challenge Ohio State, and it certainly has not been Michigan as of late. Whether it be Penn State or whoever, Ohio State certainly had its hiccups with Michigan State under Urban Meyer. They lost a couple of games to the Spartans. Spartans are way down right now at this point. But I definitely can see a lot of similarities there. But I guess conversely, when I just look at Ohio State winning the conference on the regular, whereas UGA just has to end up going to Atlanta and then sees, Alabama lining up across the field or whatever. I think I start to see some deviation there at that point where, again, Ohio State certainly is in a less deep conference. I'll just put it that way.
And my last question to you on that, who do you think has the most realistic chance of dethroning Ohio State this year in the Big Ten?
Funny, I just wrote something on that here on Thursday afternoon as we were doing some questions going into the season. Everybody's going to naturally circle to Penn State. Penn State had a real Jekyll and Hyde year last year. They go 0-5 to start the year, and then they run off and win their last four. Looked pretty good down the stretch. Remember that they did it without Micah Parsons, who opted out for the year. They lost a couple of running backs, Noah Cain, Journey Brown, both out. I think Penn State is going to be a pretty good challenge. And then coming out of the West, a lot of people are picking Wisconsin. I'm picking Iowa. I'm thinking Iowa and Wisconsin are both going to be sitting there at about 9-3 at the end of the year. I think this is going to be Iowa's year. Just when you kind of sell on Kirk Ferentz, his team rises up and is able to do something. But since the Big Ten went to geographical divisions and scrapped that stupid leaders and legends stuff, the Big Ten East is 7-0 against the Big Ten West in Indianapolis at the Big Ten championship game. So until I see otherwise, I'm not putting any eggs in the basket of the West. So I would say Penn State probably by a wide margin, and then maybe Indiana 3, Michigan 4 in terms of how the East is going to shape up.
Fantastic insight from Kevin Noon, publisher and managing editor of BuckeyeGrove.com, part of the Rivals Network. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to maybe talking to you down the road sometime here on CFB Unfiltered.
Absolutely.
All right, so great.